Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootleggers, shills, escalates, shirts, peasants, spassels, bean counters. I'm a useful idiot, and once again, I'm going to show you how objective I am and how much I don't have an agenda. So I'm going to talk about Syria again, but the idea now is to kind of cut through the bullshit. And the bottom line here is I agree with a friend of mine. Frankly, what people in Syria want to do to each other is their own business. And the quicker they get it settled, the better. And I think all foreigners should stay out of it. So that's my bottom line. So I don't really have an agenda or a stake here, other than sifting through different forms of propaganda. In this case, the propaganda is the casualty numbers thrown around constantly. And I like to address it personally because, of course, I've, like any YouTuber posting things about Syria, I've been lambasted by angry commenters talking about how outrageous that I say the things that I do about Syria, considering Assad has killed 80,000 of his own people. And that's the legend, that's the mythology that's spread all over the web about Assad has killed 80,000 of his own people. And of course, we've watched it exponentially grow. Every couple of months, it goes up 10,000. And that makes sense. I suppose 10,000 people could be killed every 2 months. But we've gone up from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 80,000. And some are even reporting 90 and 100,000 now. But as it turns out, there's a source that's relatively reliable. And there's a June report that came out, and it's a report that's from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. And apparently their numbers have been pretty reliable up to now. And let's look at what they say. And what they say is that 43% of the dead are Syrian soldiers and a militia who support the government. So we can take this mythology and this number that's being thrown all around, all over the media and all over YouTube and everywhere else, that Assad has killed 80,000 of his own people. Because as one would guess from the civil war, the casualties are split down the middle. So we can say roughly 40,000 Syrian government people have been killed and 40,000 opposition. So not exactly the slaughter and massacre of the innocents as depicted in the media. And like I say, even in this article, they point out that this casts doubt on the widely made assertion that the government is responsible for the overwhelming amount of casualties. So the breakdown is that in the last 2 years, there's been 96,431 deaths total, is the figure that the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights came up with. And of that, 24,617 are Syrian government, and 17,000 are Syria militia that support the government. And that brings a total of 43%. And this article puts forth the idea that 43% of the casualties are pro-government. And I'm going to add a little bit more to that number in a minute when I'm going to get back to the civilian count. So now we have 24,617 deaths among Syrian government soldiers, and then we have 17,000 deaths among Syria militia that support the government. And then on the other side, we have 16,700 anti-government fighters killed, which is only 18%. And that includes 12,000 Syrian civilians, 2,000 deserters from the Syrian government, and 2,100 foreign fighters. And just as a footnote, there's also been 145 deaths of Hezbollah, Lebanese fighters. So pretty interesting. So we have the bulk amount of deaths amongst the opposition have actually been civilians. And there's a number of reasons why that could be, but it would only be conjecture on my part. But 2,000 deserters from the Syrian government, so that's kind of an interesting figure. And then 2,000 foreign fighters. And I'm sure that figure has risen significantly quite recently because of recent offensive. And so this is kind of interesting because obviously we see that the count of Syrian militia who are killed and that support the government, and then anti-Assad civilians who are armed, would probably be hard to tell in the field who's who in body counts. So that's one thing that's confusing. But I want to get back to the point that I set aside. And that's the fact that, so we have, by these figures, we have 43% of the casualties are from the government and government supporters. And then we have 18% of the casualties are the opposition. So the other 35% are civilians, 35,479. So in other words, the 12,000 Syrian civilians that were killed by these figures that were anti-government, that's where it gets confusing as to, who would they label as a combatant and who would they label as a civilian. But in any case, I would imagine that is just the confusion on the battlefield. So we go back to that 35,479 civilians killed, and once again, we can probably split that number. And that's why I'm going to get back to the number 43% used in this article, because I would suggest that 35,479 civilians, 36% of the casualties in Syria could probably be split too. Let's be generous. Let's even say that 2/3 of those are anti-government civilians that were killed. So that would leave roughly about 12,000 civilians killed that were pro-government. So we can take that number and ascertain that roughly the casualties in Syria are about 50-50. And that's the bottom line. And these are from relatively reputable sources. So, and then of course the Hezbollah would also be counted into the body count for the government deaths, at 145. So let's make sure that when we use these numbers about Syria, and also I will attach a video I did before that essentially these numbers are arrived at by the United States and supplied to the United Nations. And so I'm not sure if these kind of numbers are going to make it through the American system or not. But I'll attach that other video so you can see that here. And I guess the important thing to remember here in the message here is that just like everything else, everything is massaged and manipulated for public consumption and playing to different bases. And in our case, these numbers are come up with to shock people with the amount of carnage and theoretically the carnage done by the Assad government. But as it turns out, it's the kind of carnage that you get in a civil war, regardless of where it is. 50-50 casualties, and the brutality of both sides seems to be fairly equal with these kind of numbers. And just remembering that all statistics ultimately are suspect, and just like everything else, they have an agenda. In this case, we find out the shocking numbers that have been provided about Syria are seriously misleading, as 50% of all the casualties we hear about in Syria are actually pro-government in Syria. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.